criminal justice advocate Miss Misha Cross. So we before the break we were discussing the fact that we have the federal legislation working its way through, and that finally coming to a floor House or Senate vote this upcoming week. I think McConnell's bringing up for a vote. People think it might get as many as 80 votes in the Senate. It's a slam dunk piece of legislation. The only people against it are, for the most part, the old Confederate senators. Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Whenever you got a senator named Cotton, there's no way you're not racist. Like it's just like they planned. Like you can't be named Cotton and from the South and not be racist. So Jeff Sessions was against it. That little Confederate leprechaun. Those are the people who are against it. So anybody, if you want to know something you need to be in favor of, anything Tom Cotton and Jeff Sessions are against, those are things you need to support. So what happens after this passes this week?
Oh, look at you. I love the enthusiasm. So yes, the numbers are pretty much there. Nobody assumes that this isn't going to pass this week. We're just hopeful that we can change the media direction and conversation because we still want people to be talking about it. We still want it to be out here in the ether. After this week, one of the things that we're really focusing in on is making sure that folks understand that this is a very strong piece of legislation, but it is not the end.
It's
the biggest
step.
Exactly.
Literally says
it's in the name.
Yes.
But the biggest fear that a lot of advocates have, even those who help to shape the bill, is that at the federal level, things move extremely slowly. So once you get one piece in, you might not see another criminal justice reform package for 20, 30, 40 years. We know how long it took to get this one. And to do it in a bipartisan fashion in probably one of the most polarizing American political times of our history is extremely important. So we're looking at the fact that, yes, this chips away at some of the issues. It by no means eradicates them. And we still have a lot of work to do.
Well, and when we talked about this on the show a couple of months ago, we talked about the fact that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is by no means a perfect piece of legislation. This by no means eradicates or solves all the issues, but it's a good beginning point. So I remember when the pastors met with President Trump about criminal justice reform to kind of sway him to put his weight behind it to get it out of the Judiciary Committee because Grassley was holding it up at that point. People criticized like, what are those pastors doing there? Why are they just skinning and grinning like, well, we need criminal justice reform and you have to meet with people in order to do it. But so I think that we need to have kind of these state and local level conversations because whereas you might not be able to get your senator on the phone, you can go talk to your local DA.
Absolutely.
You can talk to the sheriff. You can talk to your city council person. And many of these abuses really do happen at the state and local level. Just the sexual assault epidemic in our nation's prisons, not prisons, jails, not even at the prison level, just when people are in detention, when they're in holding facilities, male on male, female on female, guard on inmate, or so on and so forth. It's a epidemic that we joke about in our community. Like we joke about the fact that when you go to jail, you're going to get raped. That's not normal.
There's an idea that once you go to jail or you go to prison or you have been locked up for anything, whether you have actually been charged with a crime or not, that you are deserving of whatever happens to you next. And I think that it's going to take a long time for us to move away from that thought piece. I do want to go back to something though. One of the issues that a lot of people are bringing up around the First Step Act in general right now is around specifically what it means for risk assessment tools. We've heard at the national level so many different advocacy groups who have pushed very strongly against risk assessment. And for those who don't know, risk assessment is basically an algorithm system that is set up to determine whether or not someone who is released will commit another crime. The question is, however, because most people aren't able to see the questions or what's actually in those systems themselves, whether or not it is race blind. And what we do know is that there are certain things within this system that are definitely not. For example, and DC just struck this one down about a year and a half ago. One of the questions posed was whether or not you owned a home. The majority of people who live in Washington, D.C. don't own homes, period. It's not the South. It's extremely expensive. Most people are transient. They're there for a few years for work, then they're out. They don't own homes. Then one of the other questions that exist on the majority of risk assessment tools across the country is whether or not you have family in the area. Whether or not you have family in the area is not a determining factor if you are going to commit a crime. A lot of people across this country have moved because they are moving for work, or they're moving because they married somebody who's in another place, or they're moving because housing is cheaper in a certain area. That does not increase your propensity to actually commit a crime. Today, I live in D.C., have lived there for the past year and a half. My entire family is in Chicago and in Mississippi. I'm no more of a criminal today than I would have been if I was in Chicago or Mississippi. The lack of having family in a certain area does not increase your propensity to commit a crime. We also know that minority populations move at rapid paces. And in the majority of cases, it's for economics and economic reasons. Again, jobs, mobility in terms of housing, where they can actually find some place that they can afford when their families expand, things like that. We have to pay attention to these tools because a lot of the issues associated with equity are baked into the system themselves.
And, on that same point, if you look at a place like Atlanta, where we are a completely transient city, I'm originally from Columbus, Georgia. Darnell is from New York. Courtney is from California. You're from Mississippi and Chicago. So when you put this family in the area criteria on things, well, people go places for school and they stay there. People go places for work and they stay there. People go places to pursue a dream and they stay there. So we as I said, we are still in this 19th century idea. Not even 20th century, definitely not 21st century, but we're in a 19th century idea of criminal justice where we still believe that, well, are they a land-owning male of good standing in our community? That's what people think of when they're making these rules, and that's why it's important that we hold these public officials on the state and local level very much accountable, because the abuses that are being taken care of by the First Step Act are some of the most egregious ones. For example, there's part of the act that's being that something's being reformed is if you're a woman who is giving birth at the federal level, they shackled you to the bed while giving birth. That doesn't seem to be necessary, and that's something that the First Step Act takes care of or gets rid of. But on these just minor everyday issues, we can decriminalize possession of marijuana on the state and local level. We can make it where instead of you having $1,000 bond for being poor, you're just given a signature bond, and if you don't show up at court, you get a bench warrant instead of requiring you to pay money you don't have to get out. We can make sure that people who are first-time offenders have diversion programs. Our solicitor here in Fulton County, Keith Gamage, is doing great work on restorative justice that I hope goes to a national level, because it's so important that we instead of seeing criminal justice as just locking people up and throwing away the key, that we instead see it as, well, these are usable people in society that may have made a mistake and need help.
Absolutely. And people have to understand that there is no federal legislation that comes from the top down. Every single piece of federal legislation started at the states. So we have to make sure that we are very attentive to state laws. When you talk about pregnant women being shackled in federal prisons, yes, the First Step Act would shake this down, would eradicate it. What we don't often talk about is that in 70% of the jails and prisons at the local level, at the state level, women are shackled every single day. Women are shackled while they're in delivery. So when we talk about this, we have to understand that this is something that states are working to eradicate as well, because the federal law has no bearing on what's happening in the state prisons and in the local jails.
And so how do you think people, or how would you recommend people who are listening get involved on these issues, not just making sure that the First Step Act passes this week, but on general issues of criminal justice reform on the state and local level? Like, what are organizations that they should be connecting with, organizations that are really spearheading these efforts?
You mentioned NACDL earlier. They're actually a national partner of mine. I would definitely say get plugged in there. The local bar associations, absolutely. I would also say look at your state's attorney's offices. Make sure that you have a relationship with those offices. Host meetings with and have those conversations with the sheriff's offices. There are so many different levels and levers here to be able to be pulled. Do it at the mayor's office and at city council. Be that person who not only knows your rights, but also knows how to advocate for change.
Great. Well, we'll be back after the break. Call in 404-892-2703. We're actually going to go to a call after the break. News and Talk 1380 WAOK.